Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras. Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Con seguidor, punteador y requinto le metemos a la plena. Y con el boom, 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 hacemos bailar a cualquiera.
Qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Representando al oeste, aquí llegó la candela, así que vamos a meterle a la plena.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Ay, las corillas pleneras son una guerrera y luchando por la patria, yo se las echo a cualquiera.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Les pido a todos que se fijen en esta escena. Somos muchas tocando muchas y hacemos falta en la plena.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Que a la hora de luchar, al frente está una mujer. Aquí no se rinde nadie, hacemos lo que hay que hacer.
Cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Y si yo sueno mi guiro, sabes que lo consigo. Que tú te vayas hasta abajo conmigo. Y movimiento primitivo debajo el ombligo. Déjate llevar por este swing femenino.
Cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras. Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Adriana Santonia en el requinto.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Nuestras manos tocan los cueros y ya estamos rompiendo esquemas. Por el bien de mi pueblo presento a mujeres pleneras.
Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras. Qué cosa brava, qué cosa bella, estar rodeada de mujeres pleneras.
Hola, ¿cómo están todos? Gracias por estar aquí. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the second episode of OITEH. My name is Frances Medina, and I am a producer, communicator, storyteller with Defend Puerto Rico. Today, we are collaborating with Mijente and bringing you the second episode of OITEH. And our focus will be around a people's agenda. I think the importance of this episode for me is all about centering the perspective of the people's voice. What are people asking for? What is missing in the conversation, right? Both in the diaspora and Puerto Rico. I like to give a little brief message about language justice. Quiero decir un mensaje o darles un mensaje sobre el lenguaje de justicia. Hoy esta conversación va a ser en inglés, pero sí queremos ofrecerle la oportunidad de entrar en nuestras páginas después de esto para ver las conversaciones que tuvimos hoy y anteriormente en español con subtítulos, ¿verdad? So, I'll get to it, right? Like I said, and like I mentioned, for us, we've been, or at least for myself, I've been witnessing a conversation right now centered on the voices of the politicians who are running for office, both here on the islands. I'm based in Puerto Rico and also in the United States, right, where I was born and raised. And for me, it's important to start centering an agenda that's based on what the people want, what the people need, what they're asking for. And while there have been several conversations on this issue, it's important for me to center, like I said before, the folks who are doing the work, who are talking about it, and who have an understanding of how we can collectively work together, aquí y allá, right? Aquí being here in the islands where I'm currently based, y allá in the diaspora where we know we are 5 million strong. So this conversation is less about what politicians are better for us here and there, and more about what the people need to be asking for, or should be asking for, or have the right to be asking for people who have control over their livelihoods, over their lives. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests today. And I would like to start with Camille Padilla, who is the founder of Millones. Before we introduce her, it's important for me to let you all know that the reason why we are having a conversation with these panelists is primarily because, right, there's so many people doing the work here and there, aquí y allá, but this is about trying to inform people about next steps, right? And what we can do collectively to move forward. And these folks have been monitoring and also have been analyzing the situation and are activists or communicators. And I thought that for us in this segment, we should be centering voices like theirs. Again, not to say there aren't other people doing amazing work to educate people. So let's bring on Camille Padilla de Millones PR to tell us a little bit about her organization, the work that she's been doing right now around elections in Puerto Rico. Camille.
Primero que nada, first of all, thank you, Francis, for having us and organizing all of this, and Defend PR and Mijente. I really appreciate being invited. And so the cool thing is that Francis and I met in New York, right? And we used to live over there. And I have this story. I was born and raised here, and then I moved to the United States to pursue my education. And after Maria, I felt the call. I think a lot of us felt that ancestral call to return. And so I did. And during pandemia, 9 Millones was born. And 9 Millones is this platform that centers the 9 million Puerto Ricans across the globe, right? And for me, it's really important to frame things, to frame the nation of Puerto Rico as a whole. Y eso en un poco en español, pues yo soy de Puerto Rico, nací y criada aquí, viví en Estados Unidos 9 años y después al regreso, pues recientemente fundé 9 Millones, que es una plataforma que hacemos noticias sobre el archipiélago para los 9 millones de boricuas alrededor del mundo. And so I've been following the elections. I'm doing a series of articles with the platform about how people have been educating, the organizations that are taking it upon themselves to educate the electorate, particularly the young vote. And you can sign, if you want to learn more about us, you can check us out at Millones at .substack.com. And I'll probably talk about this tomorrow in our newsletter.
Awesome. Thank you, Camille. Thank you for being here. Like Camille said, we know each other before this, so it's great to be able to still collaborate with you and to be able to have you here today to give some insight. I'd like to bring David Galarza now, a call to action on Puerto Rico. David, can you tell us a little bit about you, your work? First of all, before David talks, David is like, for me at least, someone who I've been following for years around the diaspora, like Puerto Rico, Boricua movement. It's always an honor, and sometimes it feels a little bit like intimidating to reach out just because, like there's just a lot of history of the kind of work that you do and what you're promoting in the diaspora. So I'd like to hear more. I want everybody to know what you do, what you're focusing on, and who you're representing today too.
Well, gracias, Francis. Gracias, Defend PR, Mijente, and everybody that's involved with this effort. It's always great to see Mijente from Puerto Rico and the diaspora, like Maria and Camille and Mikey and everybody that's been involved in this effort. Like Francis said, I've been involved in a number of different efforts here in New York City and Puerto Rico for many years. I guess I might be sort of like the OG, maybe in this conversation, but I trace my sort of like political awakening and social consciousness back to my 20s, late teens, when I got involved with the National Congress of Puerto Rican Rights, which at the time was being spearheaded, by former young lords like Richie Perez and Juan Gonzalez. And it was a social justice civil rights organization that did a lot of work around not only elevating justice for Boricuas, but Latinos in general. And one particular committee within the National Congress of Puerto Rican Rights that I gravitated to was the Justice Committee, which is the committee that was doing a lot of work around racial justice and police brutality, police misconduct issues. Eventually that became sort of like an entity unto itself, and it's still around. And I'm glad to be a part of it. To this day, we've been around now for about 40 years. The Justice Committee still doing the good work around racial justice and police brutality issues. So please, support them in any way, shape, or form that you can as well. I work closely with a lot of different organizations in Puerto Rico. I've been very fortunate and privileged and honored to work with some frontline activists throughout the island, primarily the folks up in the mountains in Adjuntas, which is Casa Pueblo, which is for me really at the cutting edge of what Puerto Rico could and should be in terms of providing a model for self-sustainability, self-sufficiency, showing the world that we can have another Puerto Rico, that another Puerto Rico is possible. And then locally, I'm involved with the Call to Action on Puerto Rico and the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, which is a constituency group of the AFL-CIO that works with Latino organizations, Latino unions, leaders, and rank and file people. And a Call to Action sprang about, was created by a bunch of activists here in New York City a few years ago, primarily around the issue of the debt, the illegal debt, and what happened afterward with the Junta and the Promesa bill. And we continue to do that work to educate and organize around those issues because we believe it's an illegal, odious debt. We believe it should be canceled, and we will continue to fight that bill and the austerity behind it until we get rid of it, which is something that as Boricuas here that are voting in this election, is incumbent upon us to make sure that we elevate those kinds of issues. And I could say more, but I know that we have other guests, and I want to be respectful of the time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you being here. Next up, we have Sofia Rico and Joseph Torres. They are both from Puerto Rico, or here, based in Puerto Rico, right? And they run a platform called Política Accesible, which really just makes information digestible for folks like me who like it digestible, right? I mean, primarily the reason why I'm a communicator is because I like to be able to take everything that's happening and tell people what it is in a 1, 2, 3 kind of way. right? So welcome and thank you, Sofia and Joseph, for being here. I've also been following their platform for a while to educate myself. And so it's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here? Because we'd love to know more.
Hola a todos. Thank you so much for having us. As you said, I'm Sofia.
And I'm Joseph Torres.
And Política accesible in English basically means accessible politics. We like to make the topic of politics an accessible one, specifically for the youth in the island. Joseph can tell you a little bit of how we started and why.
We met last year at the governor's office in an internship, and after the whole protest against the governor, we decided that there was like not a platform that can be directed to the youth about the politics and can be in some way easy to read, fast to read, and not the traditional media that always covers the events. So we started this page mainly on Instagram. We are very active there, but we are expanding. And now we have a full year and we work in this all the time. And we answer all DMs. We always answer questions. We try to cover all the topics, mainly the island topics, because it takes a lot. There is news every day from the politics here. So we concentrate mainly on politics on the island.
Gracias por estar aquí. It's great to see you guys. So next up, we have María Torres, who is another person who has been extremely informative in the diaspora, not just informative, but also like provides people direct access to pathways to take action, right? Against legislative actions, right? Against anything that's happening in the diaspora that's threatening the livelihoods of our people, right? So for a really long time, Maria has been in my sphere because she takes action and she does it quickly and she makes sure that it's accessible to the people in her network. So without further ado, hi Maria, ¿cómo está? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing here, what your work is with Diaspora and Resistencia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. So yes, my name is María Torres-López. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I've been in the United States for about 17 years. And I founded Diaspora and Resistencia in 2017. It was right after, so Promesa had passed, but it didn't start taking place until months later after they signed it. And through all that time, I had connections in Puerto Rico, and many people had spoken to people in Congress and to people in Congress in Puerto Rico and people in Congress in the US about how detrimental that law was going to be. And at that point, I was 14 years out of the country, and I was still thinking that, well, you know, Puerto Ricans got it. Like, they are giving really good examples as to why this law cannot be put in place. So, you know, at the end of the day, they're going to revoke it. Something is going to happen. They're not gonna push it through because people were giving all the data and all the information of how detrimental was going to be. And then it passed, and not only passed, but then they put it in place and they started enforcing it. And that's when I decided, okay, well, I've been 14 years out of the country, and I was very active in politics in Puerto Rico when I lived there. And I decided, well, I need to come out of that hiatus. And even though I'm in the diaspora, I need to further reconnect with people in Puerto Rico and make sure that their voices are not ignored anymore. And furthermore, that the messaging that they're trying to bring to Congress is not changed. After 14 years, at that time, after 14 years out of the country, when I started connecting with groups that do this type of work here at that time, I realized that many of them changed the messaging. The messaging comes out of Puerto Rico in some way, and it gets to Congress in a very different way. And I said, well, here is the main problem, where Puerto Ricans are not only being ignored by Congress, but when the diaspora is saying that they are going to take the message and use it and help them, they are changing that messaging. And what ends up happening is that every law that is passed is completely different from what the Puerto Rican people requested and demanded. And that's this goal and the soul of the organization. After that, hurricanes happened. We had to do many other things, as many other Puerto Ricans did, to make sure we did the campaign to bypass FEMA and connected with groups directly in the ground to just get them the things they needed, regardless of FEMA, regardless of government, regardless of the fees that they wanted to put on the things that we were bringing in. And now we do more of the advocacy work directly with staffers or the representatives directly. And again, the messaging the goal is for the message from the Puerto Rican people to not be changed.
Well, thank you all for being here. I think for me, it's truly like Camille had mentioned in a conversation earlier, it's kind of like a family reunion, right? Because we all know from like each other from different parts of like the movement, or we know each other because we follow each other on social media, and we're trying to kind of do the same thing, right? And when we're talking about a people's agenda, which is what this entire conversation is going to be based on, right? The most important thing I want to get to is, what is that, right? How do we define a people's agenda? What is a people's agenda, right? I think there has been historically so many ways that we have used that, right? And have been able to like create a collective front based on a people's agenda. So I wanted to just hear from you, the panelists, before we got into the nitty-gritty of the issues that are out there in the world that we want to fight for. What do you consider as a people's agenda? Because for us, that's what we want to push. That's where we're at. So whoever wants to start, I'm not going to pick anyone, so somebody volunteer themselves, and then we'll go from there.
You gotta hand it off to someone, because
Here we go. Let's hear from David. What's the people's agenda? Since you made yourself the OG, you made yourself
Thanks.
the OG of the group. So I think you're gonna hand the mic off to the OG.
I want to hear from the young people. I mean, wow. What's not in the people's agenda? There's so many agendas right now currently in Puerto Rico that have nothing to do with the people, obviously, starting with Promesa, and then also obviously with the presidential candidates and other people that are vying for some kind of power or leadership in this country, in the United States, but also in Puerto Rico. I must say that following the uprisings that the young people from Política Accesible mentioned last year, I was inspired by the asambleas that were taking place all over the island, and also even in the United States, in places like New York City and Philadelphia and Boston, Boricuas of all stripes, of all ages, of all persuasions coming together to talk about a people's agenda. And there were some places that had more success than others in flushing these things out. Democracy can be messy, but it's not a spectator sport. We all got to be in it to win it, so to speak. We can't just let other people operate in that silo as if we don't, our lives are not going to be affected. So that for me was democracy 101, to see people out in the streets, in La Placita, in their neighbors' homes or wherever it may be, talking about, okay, so we know government sucks. What can we do to make it better? We knew that after Maria, we couldn't count on the federal government or the local government to save our lives. And that was an experience that was transformative, I think, for so many, not only on the island, but even here for the Boricuas living in the United States. The concept of mutual aid was taken to a whole nother level by the Boricuas on the island, and by the Boricuas that did everything that we could from outside, from the United States, to help our brothers and sisters and families back home. So I think, anything that has to do with the people's agenda has to go back to the grassroots and operate at that level. Like the mutual aid camps, the CAMs did, the asambleas, the popular assemblies that took place in different cities and towns throughout Puerto Rico. And I'm always want to say, and I think a lot of my comrades here on this Zoom will agree that, as Boricuas living in the diaspora, it's important for us to hear and then support what that agenda might be for the people living on the island currently, because they're the ones that are living this day in and day out. We have an agenda, obviously, as Boricuas, that we have to pursue here in the United States and in New York and in Florida and Massachusetts and wherever we may be. And they could also play a role in helping us or assisting us with that agenda. But it's important to just, keep your ear to the ground, talk to the folks that are involved in all these different frontline organizations, whether it be Comedores Sociales or Casa Pueblo or Agitarte, all the organizations that I've had the pleasure of working with, Kilómetro Cero, and then getting it from them in terms of like, what are the things that are going to make this the kind of society that we can be proud of, and that we can be really proud to say Puerto Rico is going in the right direction.
Thank you, David. Before I pass it on to someone else, because I'm just going to assume that task, I want to remind our viewers that you can ask questions in our comment section on Facebook or YouTube, and we will be taking some of those questions and answering them later on in the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Política Accesible. Sofia, Joseph, I want to hear from you guys, because we went from an OG to the young people, right? And for me, like, there's nothing more important than for young people to be talking about voting and politics. And I know it's a thing because we are a colony. I get it. There's a whole thing to dissect there. That's probably going to be the next conversation. But for now, our main focus is we have a power, right? So I want to hear from you guys, Política Accesible, about the importance of the young vote in Puerto Rico, right? And what people, what's the people's agenda?
Well, at least we noticed that when Ricky Rosselló went out, he wasn't the governor anymore, and then all this protest, and the youth started to realize the power we have in politics, but they didn't know how to get involved. And that's why we sort of were born. But I think the People's Agenda was born in that summer, 2019, like the new People's Agenda. And I would put it simply as what the people want now, what the people need now. And even though we're in a pandemic, people are protesting this week because of sexual harassment in a TV program last week, and the week before that, and the week before that. Protests in Puerto Rico are happening all the time because the People's Agenda isn't happening. And I think that sums it up.
I think it's not anymore about what we ask them, it's what we really need. Like Sofia said, it's time to realize that we put them in those positions because they work for us. They don't have to work for their own interest. So after Maria, we noticed all the failures that the government had, both federal and local government. After Ricky, we saw what the local government was doing with us, how they mock about us, and that inspire all young people to go protest and start involving politics. And it's important that we continue that same streak until we vote on November, and also keep it going, because in November it doesn't end. When a new government is in, we have to keep fiscalizing them. We have to keep asking them what they are doing, what they're gonna do, because that doesn't end because you vote for them. We have to keep that People's Agenda going also.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, no, I kind of agree. I'm going to tap into that whole new People's Agenda thing later, because I think that it's important to talk about the distinctions, right? Or the historic value of organizing together, in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico. And I'll get back to that. So, Camille, do you have any input on that before I hand it off to Maria? When you hear of a People's Agenda, what does that mean to you? Because for me, it means a whole lot of things,
Yeah, and I think a good word that comes to mind is intersectionality, because we are such a diverse nation. And I think when I think of the word People's Agenda, I think of an agenda where everyone is treated with dignity and where everyone is considered, right? So we need to first know, I think it starts with the individual and knowing your needs and knowing your priorities, and then hearing what are my neighbors' needs, what are my neighbors' priorities, and then seeing where do we meet. And where we meet, that's where we go forward and push that. And I love that David brought up the Asamblea de Pueblo, which I participated in, the one in Santurce. And that's what we did. It was everyone talking about what were their needs, seeing where we converge, and then deciding, you know what, right now, the environment is the thing that we all agree in. Let's go and protest about that, right? So it's really about first individual, what does my family need, but then also being open to hearing those around you and collectively luchar por eso, ¿no?
Thank you. Maria, go for it. What's a people's agenda for you? Especially since you're in Florida and when you were there from being born here and raised here, you've been there for X amount of years. Like, what does that mean for somebody who has had the space to live in both places for such a significant amount of time, right? Like, I feel like I want to hear about that.
Yeah. I think people's agenda for Puerto Ricans in the States looks a little bit different from the people's agenda for Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. So I'm just going to talk about Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. I think when you compare the difference on quality of life when you leave your country, right? With most people leave their countries because of the quality of life. They're looking for more, and for whatever reason, their country is not being able to deliver that. In Puerto Rico, people live at $7.50 per hour, and they do it. And so nobody can tell me that it cannot happen, because it does. It happens every day, and people do it. However, we have to think about what is their quality of life. Are they living or are they surviving? Is the legacy they're leaving for their kids with all the traumas that they're going through in part because of their socioeconomic status, is that gonna be better for the next generation or worse? So with every generation that passes, are we leaving our people better or worse than we got it? And when I think of the people's agenda, that's kind of like main thing, quality of life, because I can ask everybody to come and walk the streets with me. And I can ask everybody that come and no, we're going to strike. You know, teachers are not going to work. Nurses are not going to work. We're striking for all the things that they're not giving us that are a right. But if they don't have a quality of life, if they have to choose between, well, I don't have these specific things that I want right now, but if I don't go to work, then I get fired and it's worse, then they're never going to be able to get up. They're never going to be able to fight for the things they need, and becomes this vicious cycle that never ends that we can see in Puerto Rico very clearly. And for the most part, we get to see it from a distance, and we get to see a different perspective, and we get to see, and we get to be outraged about it in a different way than when you're there living it. When I was there living it at $7.50 an hour, I didn't have the time or the energy to be thinking about these things, to be thinking about, well, how am I going to change it? No, I had too many other things. One of the things that having a bad or low socioeconomic status do to you is that you cannot think ahead. You cannot think 10 years from now, because you have specific needs that are not being covered. And there are things that the government has to provide to you: education, healthcare, clean air, clean water, and in many instances, your housing. In Puerto Rico, I have a friend, and I'm sorry, I think a little bit longer. I have a friend who just went to Puerto Rico, and she works with one of the representatives in Congress, and they did this amazing bill about public housing. And what we just realized is that in Puerto Rico, many of the laws on public housing, no, they're not only wrong, they're being interpreted wrong. So, you know, I think people's agenda, it's basic needs, and basic needs doesn't mean survival. It means quality of life.
I love that you say that. And I love that you say that because I think that, you know, people deserve to live a life with dignity, right? At the end of the day, that's what the policies that we're asking for is getting to the root of, right? That people deserve, and that it is the government's responsibility to attend to the needs of the people so that they could live a life with dignity, right? And I think that you say something that's very key. Like, I mean, I was born and raised in New York, but I'm a New Yorican, and I was poor growing up. And the same way that Boricuas here are dealing with that, Boricuas in the States are dealing with the fact that they're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to Latinos, right? Quote unquote, right? So there's this intersectionality of the lack of like acknowledgement that Puerto Ricans are at the bottom of the barrel because of whether it be our colonial status or whatever it is that's happening, right? And so this brings me to my next question is, what are the issues at hand, right, that people should be centering and asking people to talk about, or their candidates to talk about, or politicians or whomever, that are going to advance the quality of life for our people, not just here in Puerto Rico, but also in the States, because we recognize that we are at the bottom of the barrel in both places. Let's be real, right? So what are the issues right now? And I only bring that up because I know they're very specific issues here in Puerto Rico. Like we're talking about, and I'll let Política Accesible and Camille talk about the issues that we're dealing with right now and that we're presenting to our candidates. But I'd like to hear more from you, David. What are the issues in Puerto Rico? I mean, in the United States, in the States, stateside, diaspora, whatever we want to call it, that Puerto Ricans should be paying attention to and should be demanding their politicians to speak about and hold them accountable on.
Hey, you picked me first the last time. I'm
Oh, go for it, Camille.
I mean, I want to talk about this comment that Sandra Garcia did here.
Do it.
She said so many things. She said so many things happening at the same time. You're not able to breathe peacefully. Y yo siento eso, ¿verdad? Te están dando por todos lados y we're como. I always say, like, we have to, each person, that's why I talk about each person choosing their priorities and what they want to go forth, because there are so many issues, right? But I do think there is like some overarching things in Puerto Rico, and it's equity. Like we need to allocate resources to the communities that are most in need. Maria mentioned housing, something that's really important right now. Like we are still recovering from the earthquakes that are still happening, and there's not a proper plan for the people in the South. So there's the equity, then there's the transparency. We need to know dónde estamos parados. Like we need to have data in order to make better decisions. And like I want to know every minute that a governor or a legislator is spending in a meeting or is deciding to hire someone. Like I want to know everything. That should be accessible in the internet. Like if I'm choosing this person and my money is paying their salary, then I want to know what they're doing. And the last thing, and this is very personal for me, this is like the priority that I feel very tied to, is environmental justice, or, you know, preparing for natural events and also energy, right? And I think it's important to know that these issues, what is the power dynamic, what can be done here, and then what federally do we need? Like right now, like with the transparency, knowing how the funds of recuperation are being used, like those are things that are really important for us to be able to fiscalizar, to be able to hold people accountable. So I went more to the Puerto Rico, but I do think—
No, but I love that you say that though, because the CDBG-DR funds, all of that is what you're talking about, which we don't have the power or the say of how that money comes in and gets dispersed and who has access to them and who contracts get allocated to, right, to do this just recovery work that we know only the people can do, right? And those decisions ultimately are coming from Congress or from a judge or from a fiscal control board that does not know what the people want and need. So at the end of the day, there is a tie, right? There is an intersection. But yeah, so in terms of like Florida, Maria, what are you hearing in Florida about what Puerto Ricans are looking for? Because we know that Florida is one of these focus points now. I mean, it's always been, right? But now more than ever, since a bunch of Puerto Ricans moved there after, because they had no choice after Hurricane Maria, like Puerto Ricans could literally decide to vote there if they voted one way or another. So I want to hear more of have you heard what they're asking candidates for? What's the conversation like in Florida?
Yes, so right after Hurricane Maria, we had a big influx of people. Some people did go back, but then also the earthquakes happened, so more people joined and came this way. And the three basic things that they all, or most of them, have had issues with is the education of their kids. Many of them moved because in Puerto Rico, they took away funds from the special needs plan from the education department. And there were certain needs that were not being met. So they left to give better education for their kids. But they have an issue here with the language barrier at times. And not all schools here have translators, even though it is required by law. The reality is that not every school has one. And then the other issue is housing. Florida is a really bad place for housing. There is no rental rights, and that's a campaign that a lot of different organizations are working on, because a person that is renting to you can basically own you, and they can change rates as they wish. And there is not enough public housing, because what they've done is that they privatize what it used to be public housing, and the new buildings that they are building, they're not really public housing. It's a contract where they tell whoever the realtor and the company making the construction is, well, you have to give 20% to low income, right? But that becomes very convoluted and very difficult then to really be able to get in there. So they have those two things. And the third one is healthcare. Many people left, especially after Maria, because there were private planes that were chartered to move people from Puerto Rico that were special planes with the medical equipment so that they could get out of Puerto Rico and get here to whichever hospital they needed to go. And but the problem with that is that because Puerto Rico is not a state, and even if it was a state, I believe there will be a problem. The health insurance that we have there, it's not the same that they have here. So the coverage is not the same. You're automatically out of network. And so that means thousands of dollars out of pocket and many things that are not being covered. So those are the three main things that Puerto Ricans suffer the most here in Florida. And these were issues before, but now they're even worse.
It sounds like they're interconnected, right? Like we're talking about housing and education in the diaspora. We're talking about housing and education también, and environmental issues in Puerto Rico. You know, política accesible. What else? What else is on the? What else should we be talking about? Or more than anything, what is not being talked about? That's what I would like from you guys. What is not being talked about in Puerto Rico?
Well, from our platform, we're doing interviews with the candidates for the government and for Senate, and we've been asking them the topics that the youth want them to attend, which I'll start with violencia de género, which is specifically, violence because of gender, specifically for women. And this is a very passionate and important topic for everyone, but specifically for the young people here in Puerto Rico. Also, the economy is something that it's very nerve-wracking for us, because as we've talked before, $7.25 per hour is not the price for someone to live with a quality of life. And Joseph?
I want to say that also the government approved a labor bill. It's called, well, the people call it the forma laboral, because they took rights from the workers and they extended the probatoria period. I don't know how it's called, but they make those 725 worse. Like the conditions in your work can be worse now because of that bill, and it's something that we are also asking, because mainly the people, the youth, is the one that work part-time at the restaurants and all those things. So it's something that is really important also, that they take out that bill and make a new one, that we can get also the rights again. We can also talk about how are we going to start building up Puerto Rico again, because we have a lot of funds and a lot of things, but we know that all those funds go in corruption and in government contracts and to contracts to their friends. And how are we going to build up Puerto Rico that is resistant to hurricane and also to earthquakes? Because like we know in the South, there has been earthquake, and it's still happening earthquake daily. So also the issue that Camille also talked about, education, we have to fix that, like COVID, and the people in the south of Puerto Rico, because of the earthquake, haven't taken classes since December 2019. They took a briefly 10 days,
and they
12
passed
days,
with A.
and they all passed with A. The Secretary of Education said, "Oh, you all gonna pass in the South." So that's an issue, and also the accessibility to the internet is also one, because we know that a lot of kids and families live under the line of poverty here. So there are a lot of things that have been going for years and have been getting worse since Maria, since Ricky got kicked, like we all say, since the earthquakes, since the COVID-19.
It's a lot.
It's a lot we have to take, and they are not attending any single problem like they should be taking it. So it's mainly a overall problem, but we have like topics, issues like health, education, and housing. Mainly, we know people, and FEMA is not giving people money to rebuild their house because of the earthquake. How are we gonna use that money? Because we have a junta. We know how they control money and all that. So it's something that is not only about one position, and specifically the governors. It's also about what the Senate, what the House is gonna do, the mayors, what the
everyone.
commissioner resident is going to do in Washington for us.
We have to hold everybody accountable. And that's one of the things that I was talking to Camille earlier. It's not just the governor. Like, we have to hold our local municipalities accountable, same as in the U.S., right, in the States. We have to hold our council members accountable. We have to hold our supreme judges accountable, right? It boils down to looking at the entire infrastructure and holding people accountable and putting people in place that are going to do the thing that the people want. And I know, Maria, you wanted to say something about workers, right, before I jump into the next question?
Yes, I just wanted to say that that type of law exists here in Florida, and it's called the right to work state. And it basically means that the workers have no rights, right? They name it in a very weird way, but it basically means that you don't have the same access or availability for vacation time or sick time. People can fire you for no reason, literally no reason. They don't have to give you a reason. They just can tell you, thank you for your work, have a nice day, don't come back.
So much, right? I think that's like the general consensus, right, of like what we're getting to. I know one of the big issues that I did want to get to is where are some fronts that, or one of the things, where are the fronts that we can do things together, right? I've seen like esfuerzos and efforts of people in the diaspora and Puerto Rico coming together to do things. There were things around COFINA, there has been multiple things around Promesa, there has been multiple things around like the issues with funding coming from the states or lack thereof after earthquakes and COVID, and there's the whole issue of canceling the debt. David, do you want to take this one out on?
Oh, no, I didn't defer the last question that I didn't want to answer. I just wanted to defer to some other panelists before I get
Perfect.
into it. But yeah, the fires are numerous in Puerto Rico. You know, you name the topic, you name the issue, you name the indicator. You know, Puerto Ricans here and there are, you know, being challenged by those things, whether it be housing, the environment, education, gender violence, you know, you name it. It's happening. One thing that, you know, that you had asked about what's not being discussed, I think enough of, is as a steady flow of people leave the island, there's a trickling in of other kinds of people into the island that are benefiting from the Act 20 and 22 laws, which is not something that's being discussed enough, in my opinion. And it's the law that basically allows millionaires and billionaires and well-to-do Americanos to go to the island and start businesses, buy a property, and basically live in the lap of luxury and paradise without having to pay any kind of income tax or capital gains taxes. And we see that the result of that so far has been the gobbling up of some huge properties in and around the San Juan area, but also in other places around the island, whether it be Culebra, where there's some prime property right now on the beach of Flamenco, which is world renowned. There's up for sale, to Vieques, where if you go to El Malecón right now in Vieques, there's probably not one single business owned by a Puerto Riqueño on that strip. And that's outrageous. And that's something that needs to be tackled by the local government, whoever that may be, hopefully, because it can't be harder for a Puerto Riqueño on the island to start a business and operate a business than it is for a gringo to come in from the States and operate a shop and you know, do whatever they want to do to get into business. But one thing that I had been talking to Francis that's near and dear to me because of the work that I've done with Casa Pueblo in the past is the looming privatization of the energy grid. We're in a prime position right now to stop the privatization of PREPA, and we need to really be united in this effort the way we were united in releasing Oscar Lopez, the way we were united in kicking the Navy out of Vieques, the way we were united in stopping the gasoducto. Why? Because billions of dollars are going to be spent or misspent, as the young people from Política Accesible said before, in corrupt contracts and taking care of this politico and that family member, and they're going to build or rebuild the same old grid with the same old problems, and the next storm is going to come and knock out electricity to the whole island for months at a time, and more people are going to die. We're already seeing, I mentioned Casa Pueblo before, it's not the only place, but in other places around the island, they're already showing that solar energy is something that is very viable and can really transform the way people get energy in Puerto Rico. It can really be the future. We could be the model for what sustainable green energy is. We can create jobs in constructing these solar panels and setting them up and maintaining them. All those fabricas that you see along the number 2 that have been abandoned by the pharmaceuticals that had to finally pay their taxes, we could take over those fabricas and turn them into warehouses and schools to actually teach, you know, people how to get into this, you know, how to get into this field, you know, and we could really help, you know, just like really quote unquote light the way in terms of solar energy in Puerto Rico. But so we have to be on top of that Luma contract and have to put pressure on all the politicos to make sure they cancel the Luma contract. And also Puerto Rico, in terms of the environment, it's a beautiful, gorgeous paradise, but we suffer also not only from what's happening with the grid, but also we have the ceniza still operating in operation in the south part of the island. We have garbage dumps all over the island that are Superfund sites that are out of compliance. La basura está aquí. There's like virtually no recycling at all going on in the island. And the list goes on in terms of the environmental aspect. So that's something that's near and dear to me, that the environmental piece and also the energy piece. But like other speakers have said too, housing continues to be a problem. Now, how many years after Maria, people still have tarps on their roofs? Unacceptable. With the kind of money that the government's supposed to give Puerto Rico and the kind of government that nonprofits raised to help Puerto Rico, it's unacceptable that anybody's still living under a blue tarp. It's unacceptable that over 400 schools were closed as a result also of the junta and the austerity measures that were imposed on Puerto Rico. The gender violence is off the skids. You know, it's something that just, you know, we have to declare a national emergency. Yesterday, I give it up for Colectiva Feminista en Construcción and activists like Shariana for just holding it down and demanding justice, gender justice, because it's outrageous that people are getting killed every single week, if not day, in Puerto Rico. And y puedo seguir por ahí, pero that's just my 2 cents.
Gracias, David. No, yo creo que everything that you mentioned is definitely like the feeling and what we're dealing with right now. So I know it's getting close to 8 o'clock. We got this till 8:30 because I knew that we could talk about this for forever, right? I think for me, one of the important things is this interaction between us, right? Between the diaspora and between Puerto Rico, right? I grew up in Brooklyn. I didn't know, and I was involved in activism there, right? And I was involved in different things there. But until I got here and I moved here, I didn't really have a deep-rooted connection or understanding of the social movements that were happening here, right? And I feel like that's the same with Puerto Ricans and Boricuas who live and breathe here, pero no tienen como esa, they don't have that sort of pathway to the issues that matter to Boricuas there, right? And for me, más que nada is finding ways for us to continue to work together, and to push past these barriers and to have conversations and to know who each other is, right? So my question to you guys is, how do we keep each other informed, connected? How do we keep each other accountable to what we need from one another versus, like Maria mentioned before, taking a stance for Puerto Rico and then vice versa, diaspora taking a, So I think for me, it's important to know how, from coming from people like you who are doing the work, how do we do this? How do we continue to push past the geographical barriers, the cultural barriers, the identity barriers, and all of the barriers that exist when we're diasporicans and Boricuas from the island, or the people of Puerto Rico, because we know that we have a bunch of people in Puerto Rico who are, immigrants, who are folks who, right? So how do we keep each other informed, and how do we keep each other connected and accountable? Whoever wants to take that beast of a question on, please do it.
I think social media is such a powerful tool, and all of us use social media. And I think it's a great way to stay connected and stay informed of everything that's happening in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora. At least we follow all of you pages, and some of people from the diaspora follow us and get informed of what's happening in Puerto Rico through us or other pages, local pages like Millones or Somos La Clara, or all of these pages that are coming up in these times to inform people. I always say there's no excuse to not get informed, because all of us are in social media. You don't even have to buy the newspaper or subscribe to a membership. You only have to follow us, follow different accounts. And I think that's the best way to break those barriers and stay connected.
I want to add that it's important that we also look for those people that are working closely with different topics of politics, because we have seen how the big media handles everything, and it's important that we see it from others' perspective, not only the big money and the big media perspective, also from the little media, the starting companies that are working hard to inform in a people's perspective,
from the people's agenda.
From the people's agenda about politics.
Anybody else want to add? How do we keep each other informed, accountable, and connected?
I think that after Maria, especially, I think that bridge or whatever barriers, imagined or real, that might have existed between those on the island and those in the diaspora, was lifted in a sort of like symbolic way, because again, going back to how the federal government and the local government mistreated the island, we were left pretty much to our own devices. We were left to basically fend for ourselves, and we, and take care of one another. And the ties, I think, were really fortified between the diaspora, Boricuas, and our families back home. I know that many that live in the States can talk about stories where they were referred to as de afuera, o el gringo, o ese New Yorkican, or lo que sea. But my experience, at least my experience, has been that to a certain degree before that, when I was involved in the gas pipeline battle that we won, but also especially after Maria, the barriers, the invisible barrier that existed was really shifted aside in favor of solidarity with one another. And so to the extent that we can continue to connect with the frontline organizations on the ground doing the important work to do something as basic, and I think we started with this conversation, to fill the basic needs. Like right now, Comedores Sociales in Caguas is doing compras solidarias. To the extent that some of us here that are fortunate and privileged to be working and have an income, and we have a little disposable income, that we can set aside $15, $20 to send to these organizations so that families may be fed. That's the way that we continue to build community. To the extent that we continue to support cultural warriors and the people that are trying to show what's going on in Puerto Rico in different formats and ways, like Agitarte, for instance, support that kind of work. To the extent that we can continue to support efforts to end gender violence through our lobbying here or lobbying in Puerto Rico, we can continue to do that, because these intersections are real clear, and the problems that exist in Puerto Rico are just magnified. But obviously here we feel them and we see them every single day, and we have family back home, so there really is no barriers. We have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and mothers and fathers and other kinds of folks that live back home. So I say, probably the most important things that we could do, because we come from different places, is to support our small towns, to support our placitas, support our merchants, support our small business, mom and pops, and any other local efforts that may be going on to increase democracy, to increase accountability, and to uplift those communities and barrios.
Anyone else have anything to add? And before anybody can ask any questions, we have some comments we will address in a little bit, but please do ask away as we wrap up in the next 10, 15 minutes. Anyone else wants to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add, because everybody already talked about the connections, and I think I agree with everything that's been said about how we don't have the barriers we used to have and how we're much more interconnected right now. I think to how we keep each other accountable, I think that's a very important question, especially for the diaspora. There is a lot of tokenism that has happened for decades from our own people to our own people. And we cannot be afraid of calling the thing a thing. We cannot be afraid of, because someone is holding the funds for your organization, you're not going to call them out on whatever action they're doing that has nothing to do with bringing what the people need, but more to tokenizing them or getting votes for someone. While we know we need people in Congress and at the lower level, for example, here in Florida, we need the Congress people at the state level to understand what the Jones Act is and what it does and what it does not. But then you have a lot of people and a lot of organizations catering to them and putting us in a position that our voice and this type of conversation about the Jones Act is not important. We need to be able to call that out. And we need to say it loud and clear, and we need to say it in public when conversations in private are not giving us the results we're looking for.
I love it. Thank you. No sé si Camille, tú quieres añadir algo antes que yo, respond to comments and all that. Camille, do you want to add how, or do you not? It's okay.
Sorry, did you hand it off? Because I'm having a little bit of issues.
Okay,
I
we're in
couldn't hear
Puerto
what
Rico.
you said. But I can hear
the
you now.
cookies, so I know that you're here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are thing I wanted to say, jumping off what David said, is this focus on supporting the solutions on the ground. And that's kind of why I started Millones, to focus on solutions, because there are a lot of problems, but there are also a lot of people doing things to co-create a better Puerto Rico. So I want us to shift the narrative and focus on how we can actually thrive, you know, and that quality of life that Maria was talking about, and you know, give a platform to those people who are doing the work. And I think something else is that, you know, a lot of times we're the people, like the citizens, we're not being taken into account when laws are being made. Like there's only una vista pública, only one public hearing for example, when they amended el Código Electoral. Or so it's kind of like we need to make sure that the citizens are actually being heard when laws are being made. Because if not, it's going to happen what's happening now, that the laws are not meant for us. So that part we're not talking about. We need to talk about how do we make sure that there is participación ciudadana. There's actually, you know, our voices are being heard when policy is being made. So yeah, I'm really thankful for this conversation, because I think it's really good to connect like this.
It is, and I think, como tú habías dicho, like you said, estamos entre familia, right? So if we're connected to each other in one way or another, because we're doing the work, or because we have been working together in one way or another, or know of each other because we know we're doing one thing or another, it kind of starts with us, you know? It kind of starts with us, right? It starts with us educating ourselves, with being in relationship. Something that I say all the time is like, si yo no puedo, if I can't talk to my family about an issue and convince them of something, like, or if I can't talk to them and come to a common ground, whether it's my friends or my family, then am I really able to come across, like, my point across to other people, right? And a lot of the things that I like to say is it really does start at home. Like, you know, it wasn't until I talked to Mom about independence that she was like, ay, tú tienes razón, you know? Like, and whatever, like, I'm probably going extra here right now because I shouldn't be, it's whatever, we're doing it now. So, you know, there's things that, you know, the ideologies that we share, they come from somewhere, right? Or the ideologies that we're like leading from, they come from somewhere. So how do you disrupt that? You have to talk to your friends and your family. You know, we can create campaigns every day, and we can tweet and do social media stuff every day. We can write to our senators and to our Congress members and our people every day. And at the end of the day, if we can't get our people to go out to vote because they don't see the value in it, or they don't see the value in the issues that we stand for, and they vote another way, then what is it for, right? So in addition to everything that you guys say, it's really important for me to have a call to action for us to speak to our family, to speak to our friends. Yes. Because Boricuas
long-lasting connections
in Puerto Rico have family in the states that are affected by the politics that are being decided on there. And Puerto Ricans in the States have family here who are being affected by the politics that are being decided on here. So el voto aquí y allá lo pertenece a todo and affects all of us, because we have generations of people that have been abused by a status that we did not choose. So this is my call to action, and our call to action to just participate. But we have to participate in the same way that we do in democracy, in our homes, with our friends, with our families, because they're the ones who are most impacted by these damn decisions, right? So, nada, I'll leave my little rant there. I don't know why I went on a little rant.
I loved it. It was a great rant.
So I don't know if there's preguntas. There's a bunch of comments, right? There's a bunch of people who are making comments that agree. I don't know if any one of you saw one que les resaltó or that makes sense to you that you want to react to before I jump in. But go in, since we have a few more minutes of this live.
Yeah, I think also the fact that the relationships, we want to create like deep relationships, like long-lasting relationships, not just superficial ones, but really constructive ones. That's also something to keep in mind.
Oh, I look at Cookie. You know, if you were to ask any just about any politician in the country, in the state of New York, and even of Florida, what would be the solution to some of the problems going on in Puerto Rico, automatically they'll tell you, let's make it a state. And that's been the bane to our existence. From me and Maria, we're talking talking to some folks about this issue, about the status issue. I know it's been, you know, the 800-pound coqui in many a conversation over the decades, over the 100, 500 years, the status question in Puerto Rico. I only say that not to engage in this particular topic right now, because then, of course, would never get off the Zoom. But one thing I've learned from, especially after Maria, from a lot of the frontline groups and organizations and my collaborations with groups like the ones in the mountains and at juntas or in the urban, you know, centers and caguas, is that they've been showing us for so many years how we can be sovereign, how we can be free. You've heard the expression before, we could feed ourselves, we could free ourselves. So when I see young people going back into the farms, when I see what's, the food justice work that's going on in communities around the island, when I see, women learning how to, maintain and construct solar panels and putting them in schools and their homes, all that for me speaks about sovereignty, about a self-sustainability that goes even beyond anything political or that any politician can sustain or really be responsible for and really promote. So as much as it's important for us to be involved in the electoral process, because damn it, we're here and we have to, unfortunately and unfortunately be a part of this process, because right now we're faced with a faulty candidate, in my opinion, but then we're also faced with a fascist. And despite his best efforts to not get elected, we have to better make sure that Biden gets elected, because we can't afford a fascist for 4 more years. That's my opinion, at least. So we got to play our role here and make sure we, push our brothers and sisters in Pennsylvania and Florida and other so-called swing states to get their butts out there and vote, because it's so damn important. Because really, literally, the life of the planet may be in peril if 45 gets in there for another 4.
I agree. Política accesible, Sofia and Joseph, ¿qué ustedes quieran añadirle?
You talk about accessibility. I know we are called Política accesible because of something specifically. We know politicians get elected and then they don't answer your calls. They don't respond to yourself, to your demands. So it's important that even in the electoral process, they are accessible to everyone. And when they are elected and they are in office, and they keep being accessible and keep listening to people, because that's the importance. And we get them there because of a reason. And the reason is they respond to us. They work for us. So being accessible and calling your congressman or your congresswoman, your senador, your senadora, the governor's office, whoever.
We call everyone.
Yeah, they need to be accessible, because we cannot keep electing people and politicians that have been there for years and never answered anyone. And they keep working for the interest and working on the interviews. We have noticed a lot. I also have noticed this, but a lot of politicians never answer any calls, never answer any email. They only answer big media emails and big media things. So that leaves us with a conclusion that it's important that they also answer to the people. So the people's choice, the people's voice, the people's exigencias, and what we need. Because if they don't answer all calls, imagine the people's call, the emails that the people send. Especially like here, senators from Mayagüez, when they go and work in San Juan del Capitolio, they never answer the people of Mayagüez. Same there on the states, when congressmen or congresswomen get elected from Florida, for example, they go to Washington and they never answer anyone. So it's important that we elect these people that are being accessible and keep listening daily to the people.
That is true. So I think that kind of sort of wraps up the rest of our conversation. Quiero, before I wrap up, to mention and reiterate the important things that we mentioned, right? More than anything, I like to say that from somebody in Puerto Rico, I like to also say that we are in a state of emergency against gender-based violence, and it is something that needs to be addressed now, and there are groups on the island that are addressing that. So before I end this segment, for me, it's super important to say that, right? In addition to that, we heard about education, the importance of renewable energy and solutions, right, for our agriculture in Puerto Rico. We talked about housing and education in the States as a priority for our people who are also combating those issues there. We talked about so many things that are intersections, right, that we should be holding our elected officials or the elected officials accountable, right, too, right? And more than anything, for me, it's important that those things, right, contract against Luma, that's a specific action. Cancel the debt, that's a specific action. State of emergency, that's a specific action, right? Like, these are the things that we need to make sure that we tell people this is what it is, right? It's not like we're coding it. So how can people stay informed, right, and know of what you guys are doing? Where can they follow you? We're gonna put your handles on the screen as well, but I want them to hear it from you. How do they know to keep up with the work that you're doing? Política, dale.
Well, you can follow us on Instagram. We're at Política Accesible, only with one A. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter, like it's over here. And you can also reach us by email. We're also by Política Accesible, but with two A's. Política Accesible, two A's over there. And we always respond. We are very accessible, as our name is. So you can always reach us, and we will be at your service.
I would like to add, it's important we vote this November, and thank you for this conversation that is so important.
Camille, dale.
Yeah, I want to answer this question. Someone asked me if I'm familia de Juan Dalmau. My mom says we're primos lejanos, but I'm not sure. We haven't met at a family reunion. So you can reach me at camille@9millones.com. Like, if anyone wants to email me, please do. The platform I'm creating is for all Puerto Ricans, so I want your input of what you want to hear about Puerto Rico. And 9 Millones is Twitter, 9 Millones PR, Instagram and Facebook. And also you can sign up for our newsletter at 9millones.substack.com. Thank you so much.
Maria, or does David want to hand? Yeah, Maria, you go for it. There we go.
I think the Coquille wanted to go next.
I know, right?
For sure. Maria, you can find us in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and Tumblr, Diaspora and Resistencia, or Diaspora Resiste. Those are the easiest way to find us. You can send us a message via Messenger. If you want to email us, you can. It's diasporaresistencia@gmail.com. That's where you can find us.
David, last but not least.
Yeah. So you can reach out to the Labor Council at NYC LACLA. That's NYCLCLAA, New York City Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. And also we have a Facebook page for Call to Action on Puerto Rico, where we post a lot of the things that are happening in Puerto Rico, and also with Boricuas in New York and in the general area. So feel free to join both groups so we can stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's conversation and for, just sharing space today. I'm super excited to continue to work and figure out how we can collaborate moving forward, but more than anything, like how we could, make sure that our people's voices are centered and are up front. So thank you for everyone who tuned in and took your Thursday evening to share with us.
Can I share one more thing, Francis?
Sí, dale, please.
It's very important to also visit Mijente, anybody that's listening to us as well. Please visit the Mijente Facebook, IG, and Twitter accounts. Right now, there's a need for bilingual, Spanish-speaking Boricuas and other Latinx to reach out to the all important states of Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, California, Texas, wherever Latinos, Latinx reside. So please visit Mijente. Another group that I work with too is called Water for Grassroots. They also have a Facebook page, and they're doing some really wonderful things. Caravanas, they're doing phone calls, they're doing in-person knocking on doors. So please, visit them as well. But definitely Mijente is waging an all-out effort, both partisan and nonpartisan, to maximize, Latino, Latinx turnout in November 3rd. So please, share that as much as you possibly can with all your networks.
Everybody vote.
Yeah, I would also like to shout out Mijente for partnering with us in this conversation today. They literally jumped in and said, hey, we got your back. So shout out to Mijente for always being there and for the important work that they do. Like David said, go to their pages. We'll share them right after this conversation. But it's important that you follow groups who are mobilizing for voters to go out there and vote. So like Política Accesible.
And it's Mijente with a J.
It's Mijente with a J. Mijente with a J. Hopefully they use this as a promo. But all right, well, good night, everybody. And thank you for all of this. And we'll see you on the next episode, whenever that is.
Thank you,
Gracias,
Francis.
Francis.
Gracias.
Bueno,
Thank
verla.
you.
Bye-bye. Good night.